I never saw it coming. For over 2 decades, I thought I knew Sharon inside and out. We'd built a life together. Hell, we even raised 2 kids and bought a house. When she started getting into that co-ed baseball league, I figured it was just a new hobby. After all, I didn't want to be the type of guy who micromanages his wife. She'd been working late a lot too, but I just figured she was putting in extra hours, maybe to get a promotion or something. It's not like we were struggling or anything, so what was there to question, right? But then the little things started to pile up. I noticed how she'd be on her phone more, texting with someone in particular. When I asked about it, she'd brush it off like it was no big deal. Maybe I should have paid more attention, but I trusted her. I did. So, I didn't pry. Still, something felt off. The way she'd talk about Craig, that guy from her baseball league? I don't know, there was this subtle shift. She started talking about him like he was her best friend, how he had this great sense of humor, how he'd been through tough stuff just like she had. The conversations always felt a little too long, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just getting closer to her teammates. That was normal, right? Then one evening, after she came home late again, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Sharon was on the phone with Pastor Bob. Yeah, the Pastor Bob. I froze when I heard the words, "I love you," slip out of her mouth. At first, I thought I had misheard it. But no, there it was, clear as day. She was telling him how much she loved him. My stomach sank, my heart stopped, and everything I thought I knew about her just shattered. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she always seemed so certain when she spoke. Always had an explanation, always had a reason. I thought maybe I was overreacting. I mean, who wants to believe their spouse could betray them after 20 years? But deep down, I knew I wasn't crazy. She was lying. I just didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went yet. The next few days, I was a mess. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time Sharon left the house, I found myself wondering where she was really going. Was she meeting him? Was Craig waiting for her after practice? I didn't have solid proof yet, but those gut feelings, man, they were eating me alive. I tried to act normal around her, but I could barely look at her without feeling this wave of disgust. She didn't know it, but I was already keeping tabs. I'd watch when she left for work, when she went out for those late-night meetups with her teammates. And one night, I followed her. I didn't even tell myself I was doing it. It was just this thing I had to do, this need to find out the truth, no matter what. She went to that bar they always met at after games. I sat across the street for hours, barely able to breathe. I thought maybe she'd come out with Craig. I didn't know if I was hoping to see them together or just needing something to confirm the suspicion that had been eating at me for weeks. But when she finally left, she was alone. I felt like an idiot. It was just a bar, right? She had a drink with some friends. No big deal, maybe I was reading too much into things. But as I drove home, it hit me. She'd been acting weird for months. Little things, her disinterest when I tried to talk about our day, the way she'd snap at me over nothing, the way she'd get defensive any time I asked about her time with Craig. She wasn't hiding anything from me about the game. She was hiding him. I didn't know what to do with that information. Was I just being paranoid? Could I really be that wrong about her? But deep down I knew. I knew something was off. Sharon was keeping a secret from me, and I was going to find out what it was. I just had to know the truth. And even if I had to hurt for it, even if it broke me, I wasn't going to live in this limbo anymore. I wasn't about to be the fool who turned a blind eye. So, I started digging. It wasn't going to be pretty, but I was going to get to the bottom of this. The next morning, I woke up with this heaviness in my chest. It felt like I was living in a fog, everything felt distant, and even the smallest things seemed like they didn't matter. I tried to push it all down, tried to go about my day like everything was fine. But every time Sharon walked into the room, I could barely hide how my heart was pounding in my chest. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around. So I started looking into it, subtle things at first. I went through the phone bill, checked her text messages. Nothing too invasive, just a few details that would give me something to work with. But there was nothing. Sharon knew how to cover her tracks. She'd erased all the messages with Craig, made sure there were no traces of her late-night conversations with Pastor Bob. But then I got lucky. One night, I noticed she had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. The moment I saw that, I felt like I had a decision to make. I could keep pretending like I didn't know something was wrong, or I could take the plunge and find out exactly how deep this was. I'm not proud of it, but I didn't think twice. I opened the laptop and started going through her emails. What I found made my blood run cold. There it was, clear as day. She'd been emailing Pastor Bob for months. Casual stuff at first, church events, volunteer work, but then it shifted. The tone was different, more personal. The words, "I miss you," jumped out at me. "Can't wait to see you again soon." She talked about their secret meetings, their time alone, how they couldn't wait for the next weekend. I had to stop reading for a moment because it felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her right then, throw the laptop in her face and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the laptop, wiped my face with my hands, and sat there for what felt like an eternity. The worst part? Sharon knew exactly what she was doing. She'd been planning this, keeping it from me for months. Every moment she'd lied to me, I had trusted her. All those times she said, "I love you," or "I'm just out with the girls," she'd been lying through her teeth. And I had let her. I felt betrayed in ways I never thought possible. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a mistake. It was calculated. It was a secret life she'd built without me, and I was left standing here, clueless. But I wasn't done. I needed more than just emails. I needed to hear it from her. And the thought of confronting her terrified me, but I had no choice. I was in too deep to turn back now. I was going to find out exactly how long this had been going on, and I wasn't going to let her lie to me anymore. No more pretending. It was time for the truth. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her. But I didn't want to do it the way she expected. I wasn't going to storm in and shout at her right away. No, I was going to make her squirm. I needed her to be caught off guard. The last thing I wanted was for her to have time to spin some story or manipulate me. I wanted her to realize I knew, and I wanted to see the look on her face when she knew I had figured it out. That night, she came home late from another baseball game, smelling like beer and sweat, looking like she'd been out all night. I could barely look at her. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper, when she came in. "Hey Rick, I'm home," she said, her voice a little too bright. She must have thought everything was fine. She didn't know I had just spent hours digging through her life. "Yeah," I muttered, barely glancing up. I could feel her trying to figure out why I wasn't being my usual self. But she didn't ask. She never does. Sharon always liked to avoid uncomfortable conversations, and tonight, I wasn't going to let that slide. She made her way to the fridge, grabbing a drink. "Did you eat yet?" she asked, too casually. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence stretch between us. "Sharon," I finally said, my voice steady, but inside I was anything but. "We need to talk." She froze. It was like her body went rigid. She didn't even turn around. "About what?" she asked, trying to play it cool. "About you and Pastor Bob," I said. The words felt like they cut through the air. Sharon dropped the bottle she had been holding. It hit the counter with a soft thud. She didn't look at me for a long time. When she did, her face had turned pale. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but I saw the panic in her eyes. I'd finally caught her off guard. "I know everything," I said quietly. "The emails, the secret meetings. I've seen it all. So don't lie to me." For a moment, it was like she couldn't even process it. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She just stood there, her eyes wide, like a deer caught in headlights. And then, she did what I should have expected. She tried to lie. "Rick, you don't understand. Nothing's going on. It's just a friendship. I swear." She turned to face me, trying to act calm, but I could see the guilt all over her face. "Sharon," I said, shaking my head. "Stop. Don't insult me by pretending. I've seen the emails. I've seen the lies. You don't just fall into a friendship like that." I stood up, feeling the anger rush through me. "You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, lying to my face." Her eyes darted around, looking for a way out. She wasn't even looking at me now. Instead, she was avoiding eye contact like she could somehow escape the situation if she just didn't look. "It's not what you think," she mumbled, her voice small now, defensive. But I wasn't having it. I was done listening to her lies. What is it, Sharon? What exactly is it? Because what you've been doing sure doesn't look like a friendship. She finally snapped, you never listen to me. You never have time for me. You're always buried in your work. You don't get it, Rick. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning this around. She was trying to make it my fault. But I was done with excuses. No, Sharon, I said, my voice steady but sharp. You're the one who chose this. You decided to lie, to cheat, to betray me. And you've been doing it for so long now that I'm not even sure I recognize the woman standing in front of me. She flinched, but I wasn't stopping. And don't you dare try to turn this back on me. You've been hiding this whole other life, and I've been right here, trusting you. But you've been lying the whole time. For the first time, Sharon's face crumpled. The tough facade cracked, and I saw a glimpse of regret, a flicker of guilt. But it didn't matter anymore. It was too late for apologies. I'm sorry, she whispered, but the words felt hollow. I never meant for it to go this far. It didn't matter. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I had to hold on to the anger, to make sure I didn't get pulled back into her web of lies. This wasn't just a mistake. This was years of betrayal. Years of trust shattered. I turned away from her, my hands shaking, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there crying. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was Sharon standing there, that look of guilt on her face. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me wanted to scream at her more, to throw everything in her face and make her feel the pain she put me through. But another part of me, maybe the part that had been clinging to her for so long, wanted to just pretend it wasn't real. That maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. But I knew deep down, there was no denying it. She had betrayed me. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't go back to the way things were. The trust was gone. What we had, what I thought we had, was gone. The next day, Sharon tried to apologize again. She came to me with that same pitiful look on her face, acting like she had all the answers, like she could fix everything with a few words. She begged me to talk, to understand, to forgive her. But I wasn't having it. Forgive you? I said, my voice low and cold. You don't get it, Sharon. I'm done. This isn't something you just fix with words. She looked like I slapped her, but I couldn't find it in me to care. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married didn't sneak behind my back, didn't lie and scheme for months on end. I was lonely, Rick, she said, her voice breaking. You were always busy with work, and I needed someone who saw me. Craig, he was there for me. He understood me. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up again. And Pastor Bob? Was he there for you too? Is that who you turned to when you needed someone? A man of God? Really? She flinched at the mention of Pastor Bob's name, but then she did the thing she always did when she didn't want to face the truth. She started crying. Big, dramatic sobs, like she was trying to make me feel guilty for making her feel bad. But I wasn't falling for it. You had your chances, I said, cutting her off. I gave you chances, Sharon. I trusted you, and you threw it all away. She tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away. Please, Rick, please don't walk away from me. Don't make this the end. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. I had to figure out what came next. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a way we could fix things, but I wasn't sure I could live with the idea of her continuing to lie to me. How many times had she done this? How many times had I been a fool? She stood there for a long time, waiting for me to change my mind. But I couldn't. Not anymore. She had broken me, and no amount of tears or excuses was going to undo that. Finally, she left the room, and I was left standing there in silence, with my thoughts and my shattered heart. The house felt empty without her. It felt like a place I didn't recognize anymore. And even though I had all the answers now, I didn't feel any better. If anything, I felt worse. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about everything that had led up to this point. The lies, the manipulation, the slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. And now I had to figure out how to rebuild from this broken place. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I wasn't even close. I needed time. I needed space. And for the first time in a long time, I needed to stop thinking about what she needed, and start thinking about what I needed, the next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Sharon moved out of our bedroom and started sleeping in the spare room, but it didn't feel like it made a difference. Every inch of this house felt like it was closing in on me, like I was suffocating in the silence between us. She would still try to talk, to explain, but I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't. Her words meant nothing to me now. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, but I wasn't really there. I'd find myself staring at the walls, at the empty spaces that used to be filled with memories. Every time I saw her face, I couldn't stop seeing the lies she told. Every time she smiled, all I could think was, who the hell was that smile for? But I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself. How did I not see it? How did I let this go on for so long without noticing? I'd always prided myself on being a decent judge of character. I'd trusted her completely, and now it felt like that trust was a joke. I couldn't even remember the last time I truly felt at peace with her. It was like everything was built on a lie. I started staying late at work, just to avoid the tension at home. I wasn't sure if I was hiding from her or just hiding from myself. The guilt of not confronting the truth sooner, of letting things get this bad, it was eating at me. But there was no easy fix for this. No way to rewind time and erase the mistakes. Sharon, though, she wasn't giving up. Every night, she would come to me, asking if we could talk or work things out. She'd say things like, "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, and I know I've made mistakes, but I love you, Rick." But none of that mattered to me anymore. Love wasn't enough to fix the damage. You can't rebuild trust with words alone, and that's all she had left to offer. One evening, after another round of empty apologies, I walked outside to get some air. I didn't even realize how badly I needed it until I felt the cool night air on my face. I started walking aimlessly down the street, trying to clear my head. I don't know how long I was out there. It could have been hours, but I didn't care. I needed to be away from the house, away from Sharon, and away from the mess I was in. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if there even was a next step. Then, as I was walking back, I saw Craig. I don't know if it was the universe playing some cruel joke on me, but there he was, standing in front of his house, looking like the smug bastard he was. I don't even know what made me stop, but I did. I guess a part of me thought I could just let it all out, confront him, and get some closure. But then I stopped myself. I didn't need closure. I needed to move on. So I kept walking. But as I passed by him, I heard him call my name. "Rick," he said, his voice too calm. I could tell he knew exactly who I was. I didn't stop. Didn't even look back. I just kept walking, and I didn't stop until I reached my front door. I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. Sharon wasn't the same woman. She wasn't the person I thought I knew. And Craig? He wasn't worth wasting my time on. I knew what had happened. And now I had to figure out what came next for me. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the door. When I finally walked in, I felt like a different person. But I wasn't sure if that person was strong enough to handle what was coming next. Things didn't get better. They didn't even get easier. Sharon kept apologizing, trying to get through to me like it was all just a bad dream that we could wake up from. She'd cook dinner, trying to act like we were a family again, but every time I saw her face, I just saw the betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way she'd acted like I was the fool all along. I started pulling away more and more, retreating into myself. I couldn't stand the constant guilt trips. I couldn't stand her coming to me every night, asking if I was ready to forgive her yet. No, I wasn't ready. I didn't think I ever would be. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. She came into the living room, her eyes red from crying, looking like she'd been up all night thinking about what she had done. She said the same thing she always said, how sorry she was, how she never meant for it to go this far. It was the same script, over and over. I looked at her, and for the first time, I said the words I had been holding back. "Sharon, I don't think I can do this anymore." Her face fell, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. I wasn't taking it back. I had already made my decision. "I can't forget this," I continued, my voice quieter now. "I can't pretend everything's okay when it's not. You broke my trust. You broke us." The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I felt like I was suffocating in it, but I had to say it. She needed to hear it. She needed to know that I couldn't be the man who just moved on, pretending nothing happened. I know, Rick. I know, she whispered, her voice trembling. She was crying now, and part of me hated that I couldn't just feel sorry for her. But I didn't. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and stood up, walking past her. I needed space. I needed to think. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I couldn't stay in this. I couldn't stay in a house that felt like a prison, with someone who was so willing to tear everything down. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I needed to leave. I needed to figure out what my life looked like without her in it. So, I just drove. I didn't have a destination, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. It was late when I finally pulled into a park by the river. The night was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt foreign. I leaned back in the seat, looking out at the water, trying to calm the storm inside me. I thought about Sharon, about what we had once, and about what we could have been. But then I remembered everything else. The lies, the pain, the months of betrayal. And for the first time, I let it all sink in. I had given her everything, and she had taken it for granted. She had shattered something I thought was unbreakable. And as I sat there in the stillness of the night, I realized something important. I didn't need her to define who I was. I had been me long before she came into the picture, and I would be me long after she was gone. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I was going to figure this out. It was going to be hard, but I was done letting her hold all the power. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. I just had to keep moving forward. The next few weeks were a blur. I kept my distance from Sharon, even though she'd tried to reach out. I didn't want to get sucked back into the emotional black hole that had been our marriage. It was like everything I had known had cracked open, and I was just trying to keep the pieces from falling apart completely. I spent more time at work, not out of necessity, but because it was the only place I didn't feel like I was drowning. There I could focus on something else, anything else, to keep my mind from spiraling. The worst part was the guilt. Even though I knew what Sharon had done was unforgivable, I couldn't stop feeling like I was somehow responsible. Maybe if I'd been more present, more attentive, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But the truth was, I wasn't the one who had crossed a line. I wasn't the one who had made that choice. She had. Sharon had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. One night, after another long day of avoiding Sharon and doing everything I could to stay numb, I went out with a few of the guys from work. We went to a local bar, a place I hadn't been to in years. The last thing I wanted was to run into someone I knew, but it was a change of scenery, and I needed it. I wasn't really in the mood to socialize, but I wasn't going to sit at home alone either. I just needed a distraction. So, I sank a few beers, let the noise of the bar drown out the chaos in my head. That's when I ran into him. Craig. I didn't even recognize him at first. It was like seeing a ghost. He was sitting at the bar, laughing with some buddies, acting like he hadn't just torn my world apart. I froze when I saw him, but he didn't notice me at first. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe I could just turn around and walk out of there. But no. Something inside me snapped. I walked straight up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I had to say something. I had to make him feel just a fraction of what I had felt over the past few weeks. "Hey," I said, my voice tight with anger. He looked up, and the moment his eyes locked with mine, I could see the color drain from his face. I'd caught him off guard, and that was exactly what I wanted. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around, like he was trying to find an excuse, but there was nothing. Nothing to say to justify what he'd done. "I'm not gonna make a scene," I said, leaning in close. "But I just want you to know, you ruined my life. And I'm never going to forget it." He tried to laugh it off, but I saw right through it. It was all an act. He was just as guilty as Sharon. They both were. "Look man, I didn't mean," he started, but I cut him off. "Save it. You're not worth my time. You think I don't know what you did? I know everything." His face went pale again, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. I saw the shame, the guilt. But it was too late for that. He had already crossed the line. He couldn't take back what he had done. I turned to leave, but then I stopped. One more thing, I said, looking back over my shoulder. If you think you're going to come anywhere near my family again, you'd better think twice. And with that, I walked out of the bar. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt something shift inside me. That rage, that hurt, it had been there for weeks, and now it was finally starting to fade. I didn't feel like I had one, but I felt like I had taken a small step toward healing. Craig was just a piece of the puzzle. Sharon was the one who had torn everything apart, and no amount of confrontation with him was going to change that. But I was done letting them both have control over me. It was time for me to start moving on, to figure out what my life looked like without them. So I walked home that night with my head a little higher. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I was going to rebuild myself, piece by piece, no matter how long it took. The weeks after that encounter with Craig were complicated. On one hand, there was this small, deep sense of relief in finally facing him. But on the other, the fallout from Sharon's betrayal was still hanging over everything like a dark cloud. She tried to talk to me after I came back from the bar, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't need to hear her excuses anymore. I stayed at my place, at least for the time being, but Sharon was still in the house. We didn't talk unless we had to. It was like we were living in parallel universes, coexisting in the same space without actually being together. I kept my distance. I'd go to work late, grab a drink with a buddy, anything to avoid having to sit across from her and pretend like everything was fine. But deep down, I could feel the anger bubbling up every time I thought about her. About what she had done. At work, I threw myself into my projects. I was always the guy who took the extra shift or volunteered for the most tedious tasks, but now? It was like I couldn't get enough of it. The busier I was, the less I had to think about Sharon, about Craig, about everything that had gone wrong. But it wasn't just work that kept me distracted. I started taking care of myself again. Started running in the mornings, eating better, cutting out the booze during the week. Little things, but they helped me feel like I had control again. It was small victories, getting out of bed without feeling like a weight was crushing me, pushing myself a little further on the treadmill every day. I hadn't talked to Sharon much, but there was one evening, a couple of weeks after the whole Craig thing, when she came to me again. She sat down beside me on the couch, her hands shaking, and this time, I didn't pull away. "I know you can't forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am sorry, Rick. I know I've hurt you. I've hurt us. I don't know how to make it right." I didn't look at her, but I could feel her presence. And for a moment, I just let her words hang there in the air. The truth was, I didn't know how to feel about her anymore. I didn't know how to forgive, how to forget. The woman I had spent years with was gone. She wasn't who I thought she was. "I don't know either," I said, my voice rough. "Maybe I'll never know how to forgive you. I don't know what to do with any of this. All I know is that I can't just pretend like I don't feel what I feel." Sharon's face fell, but she didn't argue with me. She didn't try to convince me that she was really sorry or that she was a victim. She just sat there, quietly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like she understood that this wasn't about her. It wasn't about what she wanted. It was about me figuring out how I could breathe again. "Do you still love me?" she asked after a long silence. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was heartbreaking. After everything, that was still what she was asking. But I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to lie to her either. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think I know what love is anymore. Not after all this." I stood up then, walked away from her. I didn't want to have this conversation right now. I wasn't ready to answer her questions. I wasn't ready to think about how this whole mess could be fixed. I had a lot of thinking to do. A lot of living to do. And if I was being honest, I didn't know where that left Sharon. All I knew was that I couldn't stay stuck in the past anymore. I had to start building a future. For myself. As I left the room, I could hear her crying softly behind me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I did, I might have gone back. And I wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. I needed to move forward. Even if that meant doing it alone. The days kept passing, and I kept pushing forward, one foot in front of the other. Sharon's presence didn't feel as suffocating, but there was still this tension between us, like an unspoken understanding that things were broken beyond repair. She continued to try, but I didn't let myself get caught up in it. I was still hurt, still angry, and I wasn't about to pretend like I could just forgive her overnight. I spent my evenings on the couch, alone, working through my thoughts. One night, I was scrolling through old pictures on my phone. A picture of us from a trip we'd taken popped up. We were both smiling, carefree, before all of this. For a split second, I thought I could feel a flicker of that connection again. But then the weight of everything came crashing back, and I set the phone down, unable to shake off the reality. I wasn't ready to move on, not yet. But I knew something had to change, and that change started with me. The first few days after Sharon left were the hardest. The silence in the house was deafening. I kept finding myself looking around, expecting her to be there, but she wasn't. There was no constant tension, no avoiding each other in the same room. But the emptiness, it felt like a void I wasn't sure how to fill. I spent the evenings going for walks, trying to shake the lingering feeling that I had somehow failed. But as the days passed, the weight started to lift. I began to feel a bit more like myself again. The confusion and hurt didn't sting as much. One afternoon, I ran into a guy from work, someone I used to hang out with. We talked about the usual stuff, sports, work, life, and I realized something. I hadn't even thought about Sharon for a few hours. That was new. I wasn't caught in the past. I wasn't haunted by what had happened. It wasn't easy, and I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving forward. Slowly, but forward. And maybe that was enough for now. A few weeks passed, and I found myself adjusting to the new routine. I was still navigating the quiet, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. It was like I was learning how to be alone without feeling broken. I spent more time with friends, rekindled a few old hobbies, and even started picking up some projects around the house I'd put off for years. The stuff that used to feel overwhelming now seemed manageable. It wasn't about forgetting Sharon, it was about getting my life back, piece by piece. One evening, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, looking out at the sunset. It felt like a small victory. I wasn't sure where the future was taking me, but for the first time, I felt like I had a say in it. No one else was controlling my happiness. It was just me, taking it one step at a time. And that was enough. I was enough. Life started to take on a new rhythm. The days were still long, and there were moments when I felt the pull of loneliness, but they were becoming fewer. I realized how much of my life had been wrapped up in trying to keep things together with Sharon. I'd spent so much time worrying about her needs, her happiness, that I forgot about my own. And now, for the first time in years, I was figuring out what made me happy again. I'd never realized how much of myself I'd lost along the way. I didn't even recognize the guy who used to spend hours sitting on the couch, watching whatever Sharon wanted to watch, or the guy who'd go along with whatever plans she made. I was still me, but I had forgotten how to live for myself, how to prioritize my own dreams and goals. I started running regularly. I had always hated it, but there was something freeing about being outside, pushing myself to go farther than I thought I could. Every step felt like progress. Like I was shaking off the weight of the past. The first few runs were brutal. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they might collapse, but as the days went on, I started to look forward to it. I couldn't control everything, but I could control how I treated myself. I also started cooking more, something I'd always enjoyed but never had the time for when Sharon was around. I'd forgotten how much I loved experimenting in the kitchen. It was like finding an old part of me I hadn't realized I missed. I'd never been a gourmet chef, but I enjoyed trying new recipes, perfecting them. It was a little thing, but it was mine. At work, I found myself more engaged than I had been in years. The energy I was pouring into my personal life was spilling over into my job. My boss noticed, and for the first time in a while, I felt appreciated. There were still long days, stressful moments, but it felt different now. It felt like I was capable of handling whatever was thrown at me. And then one night, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. Carla and I had been close when I was in my 20s, before life, work, and everything else got in the way. We had lost touch over the years, but seeing her there felt like a sign. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we started meeting up for coffee, catching up on everything that had happened in our lives. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but there was a sense of ease and comfort that I hadn't realized I needed. She made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months, and I realized how much I missed real, meaningful connections. It was small, but it was something. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship. Hell, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to again. But I remembered what it felt like to share moments with someone who knew you, someone who understood you without the weight of betrayal and hurt hanging over you. As the weeks passed, I felt more at peace with myself. Sharon's departure didn't feel like a tragedy anymore. It felt like the beginning of something new. I wasn't stuck in the past, wasn't holding on to what could have been. I was creating something fresh. And that wasn't easy. It wasn't like a switch that flipped overnight. There were still moments of doubt, of missing the familiar, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. I was slowly rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to fix me. I wasn't depending on anyone else to make me whole. I was learning how to do that for myself. It was scary as hell, but it was also empowering. One night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, I realized something. The man sitting there wasn't the same man I was months ago. I wasn't the man who had been blindsided by betrayal, who had walked around in a fog of confusion and pain. No, the man at that table was stronger. More independent. He still had scars, sure, but those scars told a story of survival. Of strength. Of someone who had been knocked down, but had learned how to stand back up again. I didn't know where life was taking me next. I didn't know if I was ever going to trust anyone again, or if I'd ever let someone in the way I had with Sharon. But I didn't need to know. For the first time, I was okay with the uncertainty. I was okay with not having all the answers. The future wasn't a promise. It was a path I had to walk, one step at a time. And no matter how long it took, I was going to keep moving forward. Because that was the only thing I had left to do. Move forward. As the months passed, I began to feel more settled in the new normal. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had become comfortable with my own company, with my own thoughts. I found peace in the quiet, in the routine I had built around myself. The things that once felt like weight, like I was dragging them around with me, now felt like lessons. Scars, sure, but not the kind that made me feel broken anymore. They were reminders of where I'd been and how far I'd come. I had my ups and downs, of course. There were days when I'd hear a song that reminded me of Sharon, or see something that we used to enjoy together, and the ache would creep back in. There were still nights when I'd lie awake, wrestling with the past, wondering what went wrong. But that's the thing about healing, it's not linear. It's messy. It's not all clean breaks and fresh starts. It's finding new ways to navigate through the pain without letting it control you. One weekend, I decided to take a trip. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but I had put off for years. I packed a bag and drove up the coast, no specific destination in mind, just the road ahead and the freedom to go wherever I wanted. It wasn't about escaping, it was about rediscovering myself. About doing something for me that had nothing to do with anyone else. That weekend gave me a new perspective. I spent the nights alone in a small cabin by the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore comforting in a way I hadn't expected. During the day, I explored the small towns, visited shops, talked to strangers. It was refreshing, a reminder that there was still so much out there for me to experience. That I hadn't seen it all yet. That life didn't end just because something painful happened. When I came back, I felt like I had more space in my heart. It wasn't filled with bitterness or anger anymore. I'd let go of most of that, slowly but surely. Sharon wasn't a villain in my story anymore. She was just a part of my past. A chapter one had to close before I could move on to the next one. And I realized something during that trip. There were still people in my life who cared about me. People who didn't see me as someone's husband or the guy who was grieving a broken marriage. They saw me as me. As Rick. The guy who could laugh. The guy who could connect with others. The guy who still had a future. Carla and I continued to see each other. We went on a few hikes, had coffee on weekends, just talked about life. There was no pressure. No expectation. I liked that. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I didn't need someone to fix me. But I did enjoy her company. And I could tell she enjoyed mine. It felt good to have someone in my life again, even if just as a friend for now. The more time passed, the more I realized I was no longer scared of what the future held. I didn't need to have it all figured out. I didn't need to rush. I was building my life one day at a time, and for once, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't afraid of who I might become. I had learned to trust myself again. To believe in myself. And that was more than I had when I was still trying to hold onto a marriage that was already falling apart. The future was wide open. And I was ready to step into it, and here I am, at the end of this journey, looking back at everything that's happened. If you'd asked me a year ago where I'd be now, I wouldn't have had an answer. I wouldn't have known that I'd find my feet again after feeling like I was drowning. I wouldn't have known that, despite everything that happened with Sharon, I could get back up and keep moving forward. I don't think you ever fully get over betrayal. I don't think you ever forget the way someone made you feel or the trust they broke. But what I've learned is that you can rebuild. It's a slow process, and it's messy as hell, but you can rebuild yourself. You can find new pieces of who you are, rediscover parts of yourself that you buried for too long, and figure out what it means to live for you again. Sharon is a part of my story, but she's not the whole story. She doesn't define who I am. She doesn't define what my future will look like. That's on me now. And that's something I never would have believed I'd say after everything. But I do. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting the pain, accepting that things didn't go the way you thought they would, and making the choice to keep going anyway. It means realizing that you're stronger than you ever thought you could be, and that life, no matter how hard it gets, can still surprise you with what it has to offer. I don't know what's next for me. Maybe it's something big, maybe it's something small. Maybe I'll find love again. Maybe I won't. I don't have all the answers, and for once, I'm okay with that. What I do know is that I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of the unknown, and I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm not afraid of what the future might bring because I finally trust myself enough to face it. So here I am, ready for whatever's next. One day at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I'm at peace with that. Thanks for reading.